Thank you. Well, thank you everyone, and welcome to talking about making a moon catcher. So today's craft is going to be a resin moon catcher. And I'm not going to be pouring the resin right now in class because I'm currently indoors. And when I like to work with two-part resin, it does have a lot of fumes. And so I definitely like to do it outside. So I'm going to talk about how to do that first part of going ahead and pouring your resin and pouring it into your mold and getting everything set. But I am going to jump ahead to the next part of demolding that resin from the mold and then going ahead and turning it into the beautiful moon catcher that you may have seen in the picture for today. So let's go ahead and switch over to my other camera. I'm so glad that so many of you have joined me today. This is the moon catcher that we're going to be working on. So it has this resin moon shape, and this is a mold that you can buy at Michael's. And then we add some chain, and we're going to have a little keychain at the top so that you can put a nail somewhere or have a hook somewhere and be able to actually hang this. We're also going to be making some little gemstones, and that's another one of the molds that we have at Michael's that you'll be able to work with too. So I'm going to work you through this project, but I'm also going to kind of tell you about some other things that you can do with some of the same products. So if you find a different mold, if you're not into the moon kind of scene, you can always find a different mold that maybe has a butterfly or all different kinds of other seashell shapes. Wow, that's hard to say. And other things that you might enjoy too. So all of the things that we're going to do together will definitely apply to other types of molds and other types of shapes besides just the moon. So I'm going to push this one off to the side, and I'm first going to talk to you a little bit about resin. So if you have questions, especially if you've never worked with resin before, I would love for you to put some of those questions in the chat so I can do my best to kind of answer all of those. There's two molds that I'm going to be working with. I'm going to be working with the moon, and I'm going to be working with this little mold that has these gem shapes in them too. And I'm going to tell you how I poured these and how I did these, and then we're going to kind of take them out of the molds together. And so while I'm explaining it, I'm going to use this empty butterfly mold to kind of walk you through the steps of resin. So there's lots of different brands, lots of different kinds of resin, but there's something called two-part resin, and then there's something called UV resin. And there's a very big difference between the two of them. So I want to take a moment and kind of tell you about that. So a two-part resin is for something very large. So you cannot do something this big with a UV resin. A UV resin is meant to do something much smaller, like these little gems. So if you wanted to do something like this, UV resin is great for jewelry. UV resin is great for little tiny charms and trinkets. But UV resin is very expensive, so you wouldn't want to use it in order to fill up this entire space because it would cost a lot of money. The two-part resin is a lot cheaper, especially for the amount or the quantity that you're going to be needing to use to do this. Also, a UV resin is not going to do well in big portions because the whole thing about UV resin is once you pour it in, you would use one of these kind of like lamps that they use at a nail salon in order to give you that UV light, or you would take it outside into the actual UV light. And so it's hard to get that much space covered with one of these UV lamps. And also it tends to kind of break and not really do so well, or there'll be mushy parts. Because if you get any thicker than just a tiny little bit of UV resin, it tends to be pretty liquid because the UV lights need to go all the way through it in order for it to cure. Whereas the resin is going to be a lot less expensive for a lot more of it. So you can definitely do larger projects with two-part resin. So I'm not sure right off. It definitely depends on the size of the bottle for the UV resin as to how much it costs. But it probably isn't even going to end up doing well, even after the money that you spend in a mold that is that large. I've tried some different coaster sizes with UV resin, and I've struggled to get those to solidify also. So really UV resin is for a lot more of these kind of tiny projects. So keep that in mind. Now, two-part resin is exactly what it sounds like. It comes in two parts. So there's two different bottles. There's a part A and a part B, or a bottle 1 and a bottle 2. And so when you're using this, I recommend using some clear cups. plastic cups that you're definitely going to throw away and definitely never use again. And so you're going to carefully pour part A and maybe put a little line on your plastic cup so you know how high to fill the cup. And the whole thing about this resin is that you want equal parts. So if you fill your cup to a certain line, then you need to pour that into another cup and then fill part B to that same line and pour it into another cup. So I usually work with at least 2 different cups in order to kind of combine those. And the slower you are and the more careful you are with the pouring process and definitely the stirring process, the less bubbles, air bubbles you're going to get. And you're going to try and avoid as many of those air bubbles as you possibly can. Now, anyone who's ever worked with resin before will tell you that those air bubbles are very hard to avoid. And so there is a chance that you'll still end up with some, but there's some things that we can do to kind of work around that also. So one of the things you can do is by adding in some add-ins. So this mold has a little bit of glitter to it and a little bit of shimmer. So while the resin was still wet, I had mixed in, or in one of those cups when I'm mixing, I had added some either mica powders or add some glitter or add some different things into it to kind of give it more shine. And also that more shine can kind of hide some of those bubbles also, because there's so many things going on in there that you wouldn't necessarily notice those. So that's a great way to kind of do that. Once you have the resin part A and part B kind of put together and stirred very carefully, follow the directions of whatever type of resin that you buy, and then you need to pour it into your mold. And it's very important that your mold is lying flat somewhere. Obviously, if you have a mold tilted, you're going to end up with a shape that's going to be thicker on one section and thinner on the other section. And you definitely need to kind of let your resin do its job and kind of spread. If you need to, you can always go with some kind of wooden stick or some kind of silicone stick and kind of go in and make sure that it's getting into all the corners if it hasn't quite made its way all the way around. If it's not making its way all the way, you might not have enough resin in there, and you might need to also go ahead and pour it in some more. So it will take approximately 12 hours to cure. And this is another funny thing that happened the other night. So I was messing around with this particular mold, and I'll talk more about this piece, but you can't see it because I was kind of messing around with it. But in the corner, I definitely did one of those like fossils where a fly or a bug or something definitely took a little look at my piece, got a little too close to the sun, and it stuck in there kind of like amber. And so I made my own little fossil, but I took a little chisel and I kind of got that poor little guy out of there so that you can't see him. But there are ways to hide it. So I do like to keep my resin outside because of the smells. And if you're worried about bugs or anybody jumping into your resin, you can always kind of put some parchment paper over top. So what I've done before is if I put a piece, let's say I put my resin in my mold in something like this, and then I go ahead and put parchment paper over top of it, there's still holes, there's still places that the bug can get in, but they're a little less likely than if I just leave it for anybody to come and poke their nose in it and end up meeting an untimely demise. So there's that. All right, so once you have your resin cast and it is lying in the same place flat for approximately 12 hours, then it's time to take it out of its mold. So when you have something like this and it's in this mold, you just carefully, that's the beauty of the mold, they bend so easily and they just come right off. Now, another thing that I love about this particular moon mold is that it has some etching in it. And so it has this kind of like floral design. The butterfly actually has that same kind of etching pattern at the bottom of it also. So you can kind of ignore the etching, and you can see that this doesn't really show up very much. The etching is pretty subtle, but then I have another little trick where you can add some paint, and then you're definitely going to see the etching and you're definitely going to be able to see that. So someone in the chat said they bought mesh food covers with really small holes to keep the bugs and dust out, and that is genius. I've seen those like baskets at Target and things too that you can cover for a picnic. That is a really good idea, probably better than just letting any old person into my resin. All right, so we are on this moon. We are going to kind of pay attention to the etch, and I'm going to help you bring that out. But the next thing that we're going to need to do in order to turn it into our moon catcher is we are going to need to add some holes. So we need to drill some holes through our resin in order to get some different places to hang some of our charms and hang some of our chains and things like that. So as always, there is an easy way to do this, and there is a hard way to do this, and there is a really crafty way to do this. So the easiest way is if you own some kind of hand drill, that is absolutely the easiest, safest, quickest way for you to drill some holes into your resin. Now, if you are me and you don't always have the right tools at the right time, then you make up some scrappy versions. So my scrappy version of that is with a screw and with a screwdriver. And believe it or not, this screw and this screwdriver have helped me to make holes into my moon. So my first hole is going to be the place where I'm going to put the chain through. So once you have your moon, it's probably about 2.5 inches down. When you're going to place a hole, you want to make sure that the hole is close enough to the side, but not too close to the side so that it ends up breaking off. So this is about where I'm going to have my first hole for the chain. And you'll notice that I didn't put the chain that's holding it up at the tippy top of the moon because I wanted another charm to kind of hang and dangle from that top position. So it's a little bit more towards the center of the top rather than the tippy top of the moon. So here is my scrappy way of, if you don't have a drill, here is another idea of what you can do. I'm putting this screw where I think it needs to go to have the hole, and then I'm literally just using pressure and screwing this screw, and it's basically doing the job of a drill. And it's going to be able to start digging in to the resin and making some progress. And again, there are easier ways to do this, but this is if you don't have any other tools, here's one way to get it done. So you can tell that I've kind of made some progress with getting that divot through. And I just need to keep working on this and putting some strength towards it. So let me put some pressure while I twist. Has anyone ever tried it this way? Or is this just something that I, desperation came up with? I'm curious. But it does work, believe it or not. All right. So since you can go ahead and keep using this, and then you just take the screw back out, but I am going to show you it's a lot easier and a lot quicker if you have any kind of hand drill, Dremel. Michael's used to sell a hand drill also. So if you can find that, that would be a good idea. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn this on. And this is going to be quicker and easier to go ahead and get all the way through this resin. Maybe it's not. There are different tips that I can put at the end of this drill, but I'm going to try this one first and see how this does. And I poured this one pretty thick because I wanted the moon to be very stable. And once you have a pretty good chunk through, you can always go to the other side and match up. We come at it from that side too. What type of bit works best for drilling the hole? Good question. I'll show you that in just a moment. There's lots of different bits that you can try, and this is just one that I have found to work that I've tried before. And I like to kind of go through both directions until I know that I'm all the way through the piece. I like this little tool. I think I at some point got it online. It has different speeds and different ways to get through that. But I have gone all the way through, and I'll show you again in just a moment. There we go. All right. So this particular little drill bit that I'm using definitely has a pointed end and then gets thicker because I want to make sure that the hole that I'm making is big enough for me to get some of the chain through. If you can't get the chain all the way through, then there are other ways for you to kind of widen that hole. So I'm going both sides in order to get that smooth and all the way through. There we go. So I'm going to put a hole right here, and that's going to be my main chain that's going to come through. And I'm going to attach that chain using some different jewelry tools and some different pliers and things like that. But then you can decide where else you want some things to hang. And I'm using a particular gauge chain, but you can make yours more delicate. You don't have to use as thick of a chain. If you don't want to use silver, you can use gold. There's lots of different options. So you don't have to do the same thing that I'm doing, but this is the kind of chain that I'm using. And then I'm using some jump rings to attach these little bits down here too. So I made the main hole. I'm going to go ahead and make another hole here. And then I'm going to have 3 towards the bottom in order for me to kind of attach some different dangles too. If you want to be very precise and accurate with it, you can always grab a measuring tape. And especially down towards the bottom, if you want to pay attention to how far apart the different circles are that you would add your different charms to, you can. Or if you just want to eyeball it and think that you're in the right place for that, you can do that too. All right, I'm going to add one up here. Go. And I'm kind of holding it up so that I don't drill a hole into my mat that's down underneath it. And this has different speeds and different power to go through it. All right, I'm flipping it over and I can already see that indentation of how it's going through. So you can try it to match that up. Have it in the right place when you flip it. There we go. And then I can poke all the way through. Yeah, I've heard that too, that sometimes it's hard to drill the hole when you're going straight. It's easier to do from an angle. So you can play around with that too and see how you're doing. I think I'm still doing okay with mine going pretty straight through. I'm going to pick the center spot that these are going to hang down, which I think is going to be right here. Now I am putting it close enough to the edge because I need a jump ring to be able to go through the thickness of my moon and also go through that space. So again, you want it close enough to the edge, but not too close that you're going to bust through the edge. And I'm kind of rotating it to kind of give me a little bit more width to the hole that I'm drilling through. We will definitely still be adding the beads. We can't do the pouring right now because the pouring I can't do inside. So since I'm inside right now, I don't want to do the pouring inside of my house. So that's why I'm kind of talking you through the steps of how to do that part. But we will definitely be doing the attaching of the beads and all the other things that are going to be on the shopping list. If you don't want anything to dangle, you don't have to do any of these holes at all. So if you want to avoid this drilling part, you do not have to do this part. There are definitely other styles that you can choose. All right. I'm just about there with these spots, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next section. All right. There we go. Okay, the next part I want to show you is kind of an optional piece. And so, like I told you, inside of the mold, there are these lines that kind of etch this. And so if you want those lines to show up in a much brighter, interesting way, then I can show you a little technique. Any kind of paint, any kind of acrylic paint, any kind of craft paint, you can just go ahead and put the paint on top of your resin. And you can use a paintbrush. I even sometimes use my finger because I just like to do it fast. And you're just going to put a coat over top the whole entire thing. And what's happening is it's not going to stay like this. We're putting all this white down, and this white paint is actually sinking into all those crevices from the etching on the mold. And then we are going to be able to wipe off the rest of that white paint and just see remaining the pieces that are going to be underneath, and in all those indentations will stay white. So I've kind of covered the whole thing with some white paint, and then I'm going to take a wet paper towel and I'm going to wipe that paint off. So first just do one quick brush across to get off the first kind of bits of it. And that actually came off pretty easily. So you can tell that it's just staying in all those creases. And I'm able to clear off the rest of the paint pretty easily. And if you feel like there's a lot of residue that's left behind, or there's kind of some smearing or some of that color that's not quite where you want it to be, you can always dip your paper towel into a little bit of water and get that paper towel a little bit more wet. And then having some of that wet going over top can kind of clear up any of those parts that weren't as see-through, weren't as translucent. And then just by adding that white paint, we already have some really cool texture and look to this moon that's very different from how it came directly out of the mold. So that was step one. And then the next step that we're going to do is we're going to start attaching some of these different chains and some of these different things. So if you've never done any kind of jewelry making, there's lots of different pliers to use, and I had suggested one set of bead landing pliers for you to try. So there's lots of different pliers, but you're definitely going to need at least two. And then if you have this chain, what's kind of cool about this chain is that each one of these little bits will have a piece that has two metal pieces that are kind of butted up next to each other. We're going to twist those open, and that's how we're going to get our different lengths of chain to add to this. So let me kind of wipe off my hands real quick. Got some of my paint all over. And then we're going to pull about 2 inches is how much I've been using for the dangling bits to come down from the moon. So I'm going to do about 2 inches of chain, and then I'm going to be breaking that open and showing you how to do that portion. So if I measure out about 2 inches, that's about here. I'll go to this portion, and I'll try and show you as best I can with my camera. So I'm taking this chain and I'm taking 2 pairs of pliers. It does not really matter what kind of pliers you're using. But when you see that opening of the chain of where those 2 pieces of metal have kind of come together, I'm going to twist these two. So I'm moving one towards me and one away from me. And that's helping me to open that particular part of the chain. Gotta find that opening again. So there's only one place in each one of those links that has that break in it in the middle, and that's where you can take these apart. So I was able to bend those, and then I can just take those 2 inches off of the rest of it. And now these 2 inches, I'm going to use a larger jump ring. So the larger jump rings that you have, the better, especially because sometimes these resin pieces can be kind of thick. So I have a pretty large jump ring right here, and let me show you the packaging in case you want to find these specifically. So this is a 6mm jump ring from Bead Landing, and I'm going to open up this jump ring using 2 pliers. And anytime you're opening jump rings, it's best for you to twist them open instead of pulling them open. So I twist it one hand towards me and one hand away from me to open it. That helps the ring kind of keep its ring-like shape. And then I can go through one of the holes on my moon. And I might need to open it wider, and I might need to do some different things to make sure that this is going to be ready for us. Some of the pliers have what's called a bead rammer on it, and a bead rammer helps you to make the holes inside of beads larger. And so that can be another tool that you can use to kind of make the hole in your resin moon catcher large enough for you to get your bead through. So let me work with this. Make sure that I have that wide enough. And I'm just using some different tools in order to get that ready for me to go. I might even take my drill out one last time. There we go. Make sure it goes all the way through. All right, we got it that time. Okay. I think I poured my resin super thick on this one, which is why I'm having a harder time going all the way through than I did before. But I do like the thickness of this because I think it's going to keep the shape of the moon. If you pour your resin too thin, it's going to be a little bit more bendable, which is not always ideal. So even though it takes me a little bit longer with those holes, I honestly think that's still going to be the best for me. There we go. Okay. So now I have this jump ring that's already open, and I can slip that jump ring through here. And then I also have that little bit of chain. So I can put that little bit of chain through the jump ring so that it can dangle. There we go. And then I'm going to close that jump ring back up. So I'm going to take my 2 pairs of pliers, and I'm going to work on getting those ends as close as I can to each other and try and maintain that round shape as best I can. And this is going to take a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience to get those jump rings to touch, depending on where your hole was and depending on how thick your resin was poured. But I managed to close that up pretty well. And you can't really see any gaps in that. And now we have this nice piece that's hanging. And so with that nice piece that's hanging, I also poured the same resin in the same way as I did before into these smaller molds to make these little gemstones. So once you have these little gemstones, you can take another jump ring or 2, and you can put it through the hole in the gemstone. And what's nice about this particular mold is that it has these little silicone nuggets right here that are going to keep a hole in your gems. So you don't have to drill through these because they've already kind of made that hole for you. So that was nice of them to think of us. And I'm just going to attach this gem onto this piece of chain and close that back up with that jump ring. And so you have your first bit that's dangling. And now I want to kind of walk you through some more adding the different crystals, pearls, rhinestones, different things like that. So let's talk a little bit about that before we go back and do a little bit more with the chains and with the drilling. So here are some options. These are awesome. They're bead landing. There's flatback rhinestones, and they come in this pack that has lots of different shapes and sizes. There's also some flatback pearls, and so the pearls come in lots of different shapes and sizes also, different widths, different depths, things like that. So both of these are great, and both of those are what I ended up using on here just to add some more shimmer, to add some more shine. You can use just pearls, and I think it would end up beautiful. I liked a little bit more of the rhinestone too, because I like that when the sun or the moon or whatever hits it, it has a little bit more of that shine as well. So when you're attaching these, there's lots of different techniques and ways to do this. And there's lots of different adhesives to use. So a lot of people love E6000. It's very strong. It's very clear and transparent when it dries. It also has a lot of fumes. So again, if I was using this, I'd be careful using some kind of mask, or I would be using it outside. It will have the strongest hold, but I have found that I have attached mine with just some normal craft glue, something like this tacky glue from Aleene's, and they still are not moving. They're not coming off. They're still doing really well. So if you feel like it's going to be somewhere where it gets beat up, you might want to use something stronger like the E6000. But I think that anything like this tacky glue or any kind of rhinestone adhesive that you see near where you buy these would definitely work for sure. All right, next up, I'm going to be adding some, and I do tend to use some tweezers or some different things. If any of you have ever done any diamond art, you might have some of these stylus tools with a little bit of wax on the end. That's easy also for you to pick up these tiny things and kind of place them. Now, I thought about this long and hard, and I thought, do I place the pearls and the rhinestones on purpose to kind of go with these hearts? And I tried it several different ways, and you can try it too. But what I ended up finding was that what I liked better was just to have clusters and not necessarily follow the pattern of the etching. The etching's kind of there for another kind of layer, but I didn't follow the etching with the pearls. I kind of put the pearls and the rhinestones wherever I wanted them. So, for example, if you want to kind of work around a space, I'm going to start with some pearls. And like I said, there's lots of different sizes. There's no printout for today's class. It's really just kind of showing you a how-to. And you're welcome to come back to this. So I know that this is going to take a process because casting the resin takes 12 hours and obviously is not something we can do in class together. So you might want to come back to this video. It will be available on YouTube tomorrow. So I've pulled out a couple of different pearls. And what I'm going to do with these pearls is I'm going to put a little bit of glue. And you can put the glue in dots. You can put the glue and kind of smear it. What's nice about it is that it is going to dry clear. So even if I put some glue that I don't end up using, it doesn't matter. So you might see some of my dots of glue that I just put into that little flower petal. And then you can place these using your hands. You can place these using tweezers, whatever you find works best for you. And I recommend using different sizes and kind of just playing around with being a little bit random, but also a little bit purposeful, not being too crazy, throwing things off balance by having too many in one place and not enough in another. But especially when we're starting, it does not matter where you kind of put them. You can always kind of readjust as you go. So this is something that's one of those things that will take some time and patience. And I've kind of clumped together several of these different pearls so that you can see those. This glue will dry clear, so you won't be able to see those puddles underneath it. And then I'm going to show you some of these rhinestones. And what's nice about these rhinestone packs too is that they come in lots of different shapes. So there's like some long teardrops. There are some rectangles. There are some round pieces. There are some legit diamonds. There are some ovals. So it's kind of nice to play around with having several different options. And I'm kind of laying them down on my silicone mat so that they don't roll around or blow around. But you have something like this long rectangle, and then you have something like this round one. You have tiny little squares. You have these very long kind of teardrops. I've tried with these long teardrops before to kind of use those as petals and kind of make flower-like shapes too. So you're welcome to try that. I'm going to add a little bit more glue to some of the spot around the pearls that are already there. And I'm going to kind of be building out. So picking some of these different sizes and placing them. And you can build another layer of pearls out as well as if you'd like. Or you can move on and kind of create a different cluster. So here's what I have so far. You can see some of those pearls. You can see some of these rhinestones that are kind of shining the light a little differently than the pearls. But overall, you're going to keep moving around your moon and make different clusters with pearls and rhinestones wherever you want them to be. And I wasn't necessarily following the flower patterns, but if that gives you kind of a place to start, you're welcome to try and mimic that if you can. And then you'll see up top, here's one of these jump rings that comes through, and we dangle one of these gems. So again, if you don't want to make the gems out of resin, there's some more options. Bead Landing also has these really cool glass rhinestone pendants. So these are a little bit heavier, but they're definitely going to refract the light a lot differently than the ones that we created using resin. So that's another option for you to stick a jump ring through one of these and dangle it if you want a little bit of a different look and you don't want to make the gemstones yourself. And these particular ones come in different types of pendants as well. Just like these pearls actually come in about 3 different colors of white or 3 different colors of pearl. And the rhinestones actually come in about 3 different colors of rhinestones too. So if you just want rhinestones, you can use about 3 different kinds of rhinestones if you're interested. Now I'm going to keep playing with this one, but I want to also show you the butterfly I was doing is thinner. And so the holes that I was making are a lot easier to go through this one. This one is significantly thicker, and so it took a lot more to kind of get through that. But you can also see that this butterfly is a little bit bendy, which you probably don't want. So I still think it's worth it to go through the extra struggle to get through the resin in order to make it thicker. Now, another thing I wanted to show you on this butterfly was that I put a hole right here, and I didn't end up wanting that to be the hole. So I'm going to attach a piece of chain right here to kind of connect the butterfly to be able to hang it, but I don't want the extra hole that I did. So that what's nice about adding these extra touches of these gemstones and these rhinestones and these pearls is that I can use those to cover up any kind of flaws I might have. So I can purposely go ahead and put a cluster of gemstones that's going to cover that hole up, and I'm never going to notice. Also, if I didn't have the opportunity to get the bug out of the corner of my butterfly, if that bug was still trapped in there, you can always put a little paint over top of it, or you can always put a little pearl strategically placed over top of any bugs that may have passed away. And then you can still enjoy what you have and not feel like there's a flaw. So there's definitely ways to cover up anything that might go wrong. and it's just good for you to keep going with that. So I think I'm going to take some time right now and make sure that I attach the big chain. So if you have more questions so far about the resin, about the rhinestones and the pearls, about any of the glues, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and focus on this hole and make it a little for the chain to go through. But yeah, let me know in the chat if you have some questions or if you have some other ideas or suggestions. Oops. All right, that's going to work for me. So now when it comes to this chain that I'm using for the actual hanging of my moon catcher, I'm going to use about 8 inches of chain, or 7 or 8 inches of chain, because I'm going to kind of double over on the chain right here and then attach a keychain to the top of it in order for it to be able to be hung. So there's a question in the chat as we're going with our chain that's asking about making it more colorful. So I liked this clear one with some extra pizzazz because I wanted it to kind of be see-through and kind of refract some light. But you can, before, when you're mixing your resin and you have your resin in your cup, there's something called mica powder, and mica powder can be stirred in. So if you want to make something darker, something more mystical, something more interesting, or if you want to put more of these like glitter chunks and flakes or confetti or whatever it is you want to put into the base of your resin, just do that when you're stirring, and stir very carefully and very slowly when you're doing it. And then you should be able to add in whatever it is that you want. Now, another way, like I was saying before, is instead of the white paint and then wiping off the white paint, you can always do a different color paint. So maybe a dark blue or maybe a red or something is going to give you a very dramatically different look. So I'm going to measure out about 8 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually, I think I'm going to do just 7 inches. And then when I find where the 7 inches are, I'm going to go to that part of the chain and I'm going to find where the 2 pieces of metal connect. And I'm going to take 2 pairs of pliers, one on either side of that metal. And I'm going to twist those 2. So I'm going to twist one towards me and one away from me. And that's opening up that chain. And then I'm able to slip that 7 inches off and leave the rest on the spool. Now, if my hole is wide enough, and I don't know yet if it is or not, it might not be, I'm going to need to go through there. Let's see. So I'm just kind of trying some different techniques to widen this so that the chain can fit through. There are different sizes of chains too. So if you don't want the holes to be as large as the holes that I'm making, you can always use a thinner chain with a smaller gauge, and that would work for you as well. You can make your own chain using jump rings also. So lots of different ways. I think that might be pretty darn close now. We're getting there. So at this point, I'm using my screwdriver to help, but there's lots of different ways to do this. And I'm just kind of using that back and forth motion to kind of get it wider and wider. And then I'm going to stick my drill through one last time. Towards the different sides. All right. Come on, chain. You can do it. I really thought I had it that time. So all in all, I would think that this whole project, we only have an hour together today, but I think this whole project would probably be a good weekend project. Definitely because the resin pouring itself is gonna need to sit for about 12 hours before you start the next part. So it's probably a 2 or 3 day kind of keep coming back to this project and finding ways to get it to where you want it to be. All right. You can do it. The anticipation must be killing you. Really, it's wide enough. Aha, look at me. All right, there we go. And then I am going to open up this piece and I'm going to double it back over and kind of attach it to itself right here. And then I'm going to have this piece to dangle and we're going to put the key ring at the end of that in order to make that go. So now that this is in, I'm going to take the very last chain and I'm going to spread it open a little bit. And I'm spreading it open so that I can reattach it and so that it can hold that part of the moon catcher. So I'm twisting one towards me and one away from me to kind of make an opening. And this is a thick chain and it is pretty strong. I'm using quite a bit of pressure and force. Maybe one towards me and one away from me to open that. There we go. So now that it's open wide enough, I pick a link for it to go through. I don't want it too tight because I do want it to be able to kind of twist and dangle. I might need to open it a little bit wider because the chain is thick to be able to fit this opening through that chain and connect that link. There we go. And now that this is open, slip it through. And then my next job is to close it back up by twisting in the opposite direction. Close that chain back up. Very strong, but I am stronger. There we go. All right, and so that piece is nice and even again. So this doubles over and that grabs our moon from both sides and leaves it with a nice looking chain. And then I do have a key ring, just any kind of key ring will work. And you shouldn't really need to add an extra jump ring or anything. The key ring should go pretty quickly, just opening up that little space and sliding it around. And then that key ring is going to be perfect to be able to either put on a hook, put on a nail, put on wherever you are going to hang this. And then you can decide if that chain's too long, if you want to cut down some of the chain, or if you want to make it longer or shorter. All of that is up to you. And so it looks like we have just a couple more minutes left together. So if you have any questions so far, or anything that you're curious about, let me know in the chat. And I'm going to go back to adding some more of my embellishments. But you've seen the process of using a 2-part resin and measuring the resin to put into the cups, and then pouring it into the molds, leaving the molds nice and flat for 12 hours, trying to protect them. Somebody suggested mesh covers, which is genius, so that no critters or anybody gets into it while it's still sticky. And then you're going to demold. You have the option of putting some white paint or some different color paint on this and then wiping it back off so that it stays in the etched portions. And then we added some holes using some little drills or using different techniques that you can use in order to get that. It's harder to drill through when your resin is thick, but your resin should be thick because you don't want it to bend. You want it to be pretty hard. And then you can add different chains. So if I made a couple more holes, I could make it similar to the one I've already done, where I have 3 dangling. So I can add some more holes, add chains. I decided that I think it looks best when you have the same length of chain. I played around with that for a little bit, but I did 2 inches every single time, regardless of what part of the curve of the moon it was on. And so I think that's a good idea for you too. And then when you're adding your rhinestones and adding your different pearls and things, you can use a tacky glue, you can use your E6000, you can use lots of different things in order to give you places to put these embellishments on. And I found that using kind of like a random technique works best for me. But if you're able to kind of follow those rose patterns, I would love to see what kind of things you come up with. So if anyone ends up making this project, I would love for you to share with us at Learn with Michaels. You can tag us on Instagram and send us a quick picture of what you've created. And if you use a different mold, like the butterfly, I'd love to see what can turn out with this butterfly mold too, and how you might dangle things from the wings of the butterfly. So I have had a good class, and I think that we've done a pretty cool project together. I think a moon catcher is something pretty beautiful. So I am thankful that you were here to craft with me today. And tomorrow I do have another jewelry class. So I would love for you to kind of learn a little bit more with your jewelry techniques with seed beads. But it's been fun, and I hope to see you again at a craft class soon. Bye.